son of Abinoam, sang this song, "When the princes in Israel take the lead, when the people willingly offer themselves, praise the Lord." There's this value. Deborah's not a prince. She's a prophetess and a judge, but there's this value that says, if only the princes would lead. They don't have princes, but it's a masculine word to refer to male leaders. If only they would lead, and then the people would willingly offer themselves, God should be praised. You get this sense clearly from Deborah that that's the desire on the heart, that the men would step up and that everybody would follow good leadership. Let's move on. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. This is the confusing, weird one that we spent a bit of time on in the first week, because it's talking about women need to wear hats in church and men don't. 1 Corinthians chapter. Now, no one in here is wearing a hat. We've got a headband, no hats. And don't worry, I'm not going to call you out and point to you and say you're all sinners. But I'm just going to read it and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Okay, so we're in 1 Corinthians 11, beginning in verse 3, reading through verse 16. Paul says, "But I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is man, and the head of Christ is God." This is word head being used metaphorically exactly the same way we use head in English. In English, head can be the head of a river, meaning its source. Head can also be the head of a corporation, meaning the leader. Okay, so head means both source and leadership. And it refers to both of those, at least in a sense. And so Paul is creating kind of a hierarchy. There's God the Father, then there's Christ his Son, then there's man, and then there's woman. What he's drawing out for us, okay? 4, every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is the same as having her head shaved. For if a woman does not cover her head, she might as well have her hair cut off. But if it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut off or her head shaved, then she should cover her head. Just keep going. A man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. For man did not come from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. That just means Adam was created first. God took the rib out of Adam's side, and then he made the woman. Okay, so man was created first, and then the woman was created from and for the man. It is for this reason that a woman ought to have authority over her own head, because of the angels. That's a confusing phrase. No scholars have consensus on that, but it does teach us that angels watch what we do. Even right here. Because of the angels. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman, for as woman came from man, so also man is born of woman. But everything comes from God. We're almost there. Judge for yourselves, is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not the very nature of things teach you that if a man has long hair, it's a disgrace to him, but that if a woman has long hair, it is her glory? For long hair is given to her as a covering. If anyone wants to be contentious about this, we have no other practice, nor do the churches of God. Now, I'm just going to explain a little bit of what's going on here. Number one, it's essential that we remember that head coverings in that time were a symbol of servitude, a symbol of subservience. If you were a master and you had a servant, your servant would wear something on his head. So a head covering was a symbol of servitude. Okay? So now, when Paul is talking about in the context of worship, in the context of prayer and prophecy, speaking for God, in that context, what Paul is then saying is he's saying the woman should have a symbol about her of servitude. And the man should have no such symbol. What in the world is that all about? We'll take it one step deeper. It all starts with this head thing that he says, God, Christ, man, woman, this head relationship. What Paul is doing is he's playing with the physical head of a person and the metaphorical head of a person. My physical head rests right here. But my metaphorical head is God himself through Christ. He's the one who made me. And as a man, he's the one who made the first man. But then Paul is saying for a woman, her physical head likewise is right here. But for a woman, her metaphorical head is a man. And a man always stands underneath God. So this is the crazy picture. What he's saying is that in the context of a church, when you're speaking or praying in the context of speaking for God or speaking to God, the woman is a representative of the humility of humankind. And the man needs to be a representative of the authority of God. Okay, that doesn't mean that the woman by herself needs to be in subservience. It means she stands as a symbol of how all of humanity is underneath authority. And then the man, not that he himself bears authority, but that he stands as a symbol, as a picture of the God who is the highest authority. Okay, so that's the command. How do we apply that in our world today? The problem in our world today is that we don't have any cultural symbols of subservience. So hats don't mean that today. If you walked in here with a hat, I wouldn't say, oh, yep, you're a slave. I wouldn't, well, maybe to the brand name that's on your hat, but that's a different story altogether, or maybe to your team, I don't know, but that's a different story. I would not say you're a slave. So hats are not a symbol of subservience. Instead, I think there's something else. I think what Paul is talking about is he's talking about an attitude. We would apply that today with an attitude. If we had a cultural symbol like that, we should apply it. But there's an attitude going on here that he's trying to portray for us, and it's this. It's that in the context of a church relationship, in the context of worship, in context of prayer and prophecy and worship and things like that, women need to take the attitude of humility and lifting up guys. And guys need to take an attitude of representing an authority that is not their own. Representing an authority that is God Himself. In other words, men need to represent God, a high calling. And women need to represent what's best of humanity, a high calling. And that together that forms a beautiful picture. So, here's the temptation. I think the temptation behind this command is that men can avoid or abuse authority. Men can be tempted to avoid it or to abuse it. And on the other side, women can pridefully draw attention to themselves in ways that are not appropriate for them. Just real briefly, there are some church traditions that require women wear hats to church. And in some of those church traditions, like in the German Baptist, everything about the church is all very humble, and the women will wear the same little tiny lace hats. I think there's something honorable in that. But there are other church traditions where it's just like, wear your Sunday best, and the women come to church with a hat. And I've talked to some of the pastors in those church traditions, and they will tell me that the women actually compete with their hats. They try to see who can wear the best hat, who can wear the coolest hat, who can wear the most extravagant hat. And that's exactly contrary to what Paul is saying here. It's not about the hat. It's about the heart. Okay, so let's move on, because there's another passage here that I think is fascinating. It's from 1 Timothy, but it speaks to the same idea. Paul says to Timothy, "Therefore I want men everywhere to pray, lifting up holy hands without anger or disputing. I also want the women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds, appropriate for women who profess to worship God." Men have a temptation to abuse authority, sometimes getting into violence and arguments. Women have a temptation to artificially enhance themselves in ways that draws attention to themselves without this kind of humility God is asking for. Okay, let's just move on. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, we get a couple verses here that are really interesting. Chapter 14, verses 33 through 35. So if you're still in 1 Corinthians, just flip over a couple pages. Here we go. Paul says, "For God is not a God of disorder, but of peace, as in all the congregations of the Lord's people, women should remain silent in the churches. They're not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home, for it's disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church." And then also in 1 Timothy chapter 2, Paul would say the same thing. He would say he wants women to learn in quietness and in full submission. He doesn't want women to have authority or to teach over men. And it's like, okay, what is Paul talking about? Well, pay real close attention here. He says they're not allowed to speak, and then the next time he uses a verbal word, it's the word inquire. If they want to inquire about something. In other words, the speaking that's being done is somehow connected to inquiring. The speaking seems as if Paul is talking about a problem in the Corinthian church where the women who were not educated, because the men had kept them uneducated for centuries, the women who were uneducated had questions about God. And Paul says, don't let them speak up, because when they speak up, they're speaking up from a place of disrupting the entire meeting, and they're speaking up from a place of asking questions that are just derailing the whole thing. So if they have to ask a question, tell them to ask their husbands, and oh, by the way, the husbands should tell them what the answer is. So instead of being an oppressive kind of thing, where Paul is saying, women shut up, he's saying, no. Don't be a distraction, but ask your questions at the right time so that you can learn too. In a sense, he's trying to lift up women as well. But here's the temptation I think you can see behind that. The weird thing, well, first of all, for men, I think the temptation is to isolate and ignore women. Guys like to be in boys' clubs. Guys like to hang out with other guys. We like to have secrets. Secret societies are mostly male societies. Why is that? I don't know what the deal is, but guys like to isolate and ignore women and say, your opinion doesn't matter. That's a temptation. But on the other side, women have a temptation too. And Paul says this weird thing in Timothy, if you wanted to go over there. He says, in Timothy, Eve is the one who was deceived by the serpent. It wasn't Adam, it was Eve who was deceived. Does that mean all women are more prone to heresy? I don't know. But what I do know is this. In Paul's day, the women were uneducated, and so they were very easily susceptible to any kind of teaching. In our day, women are highly educated, often more educated than men are. But still, they like Oprah better than us dudes. Why is that? I don't know. This is my only thought of it, okay? My thought is that maybe women are wired up to want connections and to be able to build connections. And if someone can say, here's a cool connection, they might be likely to say, oh, that makes sense to me. That works for me. Men, not as wired to make those connections, are willing to just say, you tell me what it says and I'll believe it. Maybe. I don't know. That's just my own thought. But what I do know is that Paul seems to indicate there's a temptation for women that they can be tempted to heresy, to welcome it. I'm not saying women are heretics, because most of the heretics in the history of the church have been men. But there's something going on there. I don't know all the details of it, but Paul is saying there's a temptation there. Maybe it's the desire for connection.